Welcome to Digital Sovereignty 101. The European digital sovereignty movement represents one of the most significant geopolitical and economic shifts in contemporary technology policy, driven by the recognition that Europe's overwhelming dependence on foreign, primarily American, technology infrastructure threatens its economic security, democratic autonomy, and strategic independence. The 2025 State of the Digital Decade report emphasizes that persistent strategic dependencies threaten the EU's economic security and technological sovereignty, particularly in semiconductors, cloud and data infrastructure, and cybersecurity technologies. The urgency driving this movement has intensified dramatically in 2025 as transatlantic relations face unprecedented strain. Following geopolitical tensions between the US and Europe, MEPs are urging the EU to finally build technological independence from America after decades of nibbling around the edges of US technology power through investigations and fines. The concern extends beyond economic competition to existential democratic risks, with European policymakers warning that US tech could be weaponized for regime change in Europe and make businesses vulnerable to a Washington-operated kill switch. Current dependency statistics reveal the depth of Europe's technological vulnerability. 3 US firms provide 70% of Europe's cloud computing services, while over 80% of Europe's digital infrastructure and technologies are imported from outside the continent. Analysis of more than 9,600 publicly listed European companies found that approximately 3/4 rely on American technology firms to operate their businesses, with Iceland, Norway, Ireland, Finland, and Sweden showing the highest reliance. Over 90% of their companies depend on US tech giants for cloud services. The strategic implications of this dependency have become alarmingly clear. European leaders now recognize that reliance on foreign technology creates vulnerabilities to extraterritorial legislation like the US Cloud Act, geopolitical pressure campaigns, potential service interruptions due to foreign government actions, and algorithmic manipulation that can influence democratic processes. Wire's 2025 European Sovereignty Survey found that only 16% of respondents were optimistic that Europe would achieve digital sovereignty within the next 5 years. Yet urgency is growing among leaders, aligning around strategic autonomy. The European Union has developed a comprehensive legislative framework designed to assert technological independence and establish new rules for digital markets, platform governance, and artificial intelligence deployment. These landmark regulations, the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, and the AI Act, collectively represent the EU's most ambitious attempt to shape cyberspace governance while reducing dependency on dominant tech platforms. The Digital Markets Act, adopted in July 2022 and fully enforceable since 2023, targets the structural power of digital gatekeepers who control essential platform services and can unfairly advantage their own offerings while restricting competitors. The DMA designates certain large platforms as gatekeepers when they meet specific criteria related to size, market position, and user base, then subjects them to specific obligations designed to prevent anti-competitive behavior. Core DMA provisions prohibit gatekeepers from self-preferencing their own services, require interoperability with competing services, mandate data portability to enable user switching, prevent bundling of services without user consent, and establish transparency requirements for algorithmic ranking and advertising systems. These obligations fundamentally challenge the business models that enabled American tech giants to dominate European digital markets through network effects and ecosystem lock-in. The enforcement approach represents a significant departure from traditional competition law. Rather than waiting for specific violations and lengthy investigations, the DMA establishes ex-ante rules that gatekeepers must follow continuously, with substantial penalties for non-compliance reaching up to 10% of global turnover for initial violations and 20% for repeated infringements. This proactive regulatory stance signals Europe's determination to restructure digital markets before dominant positions become irreversible. The Digital Services Act complements the DMA by establishing comprehensive rules for how online platforms must moderate content, protect users, and maintain transparency in their operations. While the DMA addresses market structure, the DSA focuses on platform responsibilities, user rights, and systemic risk management for the largest platforms. The DSA creates tiered obligations based on platform size and influence. All digital services face baseline requirements for transparency, user complaint mechanisms, and illegal content removal. Larger platforms face additional obligations including transparency reporting, external auditing requirements, and cooperation with authorities. Very large online platforms, VLOPs, and very large online search engines, VLOSEs, those reaching over 45 million monthly active users in the EU, face the most stringent requirements. Key DSA provisions include mandatory risk assessments for systemic risks to public discourse, civic processes, and public security. Algorithmic transparency requirements, enabling researchers and regulators to understand how content is amplified or suppressed. Bans on dark patterns that manipulate user choices. Restrictions on targeted advertising based on sensitive data, and enhanced protections for minors. These requirements directly challenge the business models of major US platforms built on opaque algorithmic curation and behavioral advertising. The DSA enforcement mechanism empowers both the European Commission and national digital services coordinators to investigate violations and impose penalties up to 6% of global annual turnover. This regulatory architecture ensures that platforms cannot simply ignore European rules or treat fines as a cost of doing business. The AI Act, finalized in 2024 and entering force progressively through 2027, represents the world's first comprehensive regulatory framework for artificial intelligence, establishing risk-based rules that govern AI system development, deployment, and use. The Act categorizes AI systems by risk level and applies proportionate requirements, with the strictest rules for high-risk applications and outright bans on certain prohibited practices. The risk-based approach creates 4 categories. Unacceptable risk systems are banned entirely, including social scoring by governments, real-time biometric surveillance in public spaces, with limited exceptions, and AI systems that manipulate human behavior or exploit vulnerabilities. High-risk AI systems, those used in critical infrastructure, education, employment, law enforcement, migration management, and justice administration, face stringent requirements including risk management systems, data quality standards, transparency obligations, human oversight, and accuracy requirements. General-purpose AI models, including foundation models like large language models, face specific obligations under the AI Act. Providers must maintain technical documentation, ensure transparency about training data, including copyrighted materials, implement safeguards against illegal content generation, and publish detailed summaries of training data. Models with systemic risk, those with capabilities that could pose significant risks, face additional requirements including adversarial testing, incident reporting, and cybersecurity measures. The AI Act's governance architecture introduces the European AI Office, AIO, as the central supervisory authority, particularly for general-purpose AI models. While the AIO coordinates enforcement, existing regulators, data protection authorities, market surveillance bodies, and sectoral regulators maintain primary enforcement authority for AI systems within their domains. This multi-layered governance creates potential complexity, but ensures that AI regulation integrates with existing regulatory frameworks. The DMA, DSA, and AI Act form an interconnected regulatory ecosystem where obligations overlap and reinforce each other. Large platforms deploying AI systems face simultaneous obligations under all 3 frameworks. DMA requirements for interoperability and data access, DSA requirements for risk assessment and algorithmic transparency, and AI Act requirements for high-risk system governance. This regulatory coherence serves Europe's broader digital sovereignty objectives by establishing European standards for technology governance that reflect European values. The pursuit of digital sovereignty functions as an overarching goal and framework connecting these legal acts, positioning Europe to set global norms rather than simply adopting standards established elsewhere. The Brussels effect, where EU regulations become de facto global standards due to market size, extends European influence beyond its borders, while reducing dependence on foreign technology governance models. European organizations are moving beyond regulation toward active construction of technological alternatives that reduce dependency on US tech giants. This shift from defensive regulation to offensive capability building marks a fundamental transformation in European digital strategy, recognizing that sovereignty requires not just rules, but actual European-controlled infrastructure. Gaia-X represents Europe's most ambitious infrastructure initiative, aiming to create a federated, secure data infrastructure based on European values of transparency, openness, data protection, and security. Launched in 2019 by Germany and France, and now involving over 300 companies, Gaia-X seeks to establish interoperable cloud infrastructure where users retain control over data access and usage without depending on foreign hyperscalers. The Gaia-X approach differs fundamentally from building a European competitor to AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. Rather than creating another centralized cloud provider, Gaia-X establishes standards, rules, and verification frameworks, enabling European cloud services to interoperate while maintaining transparency and user control. This federated model connects existing European cloud capabilities through open interfaces and standards, enabling data exchange within trustworthy environments that comply with European regulations. Gaia-X focuses on developing sectoral data spaces for industries like healthcare, automotive, energy, and mobility. These data spaces enable secure information exchange within specific sectors while ensuring data management aligns with principles of transparency, reversibility, and portability. The European Health Data Space, officially launched in 2025, exemplifies how Gaia-X principles translate into operational infrastructure supporting sensitive data applications. The strategic value of Gaia-X extends beyond technical capabilities to encompass governance and sovereignty principles. By establishing European-controlled infrastructure aligned with European values, Gaia-X creates alternatives to US cloud dominance that don't require organizations to choose between advanced capabilities and regulatory compliance. However, implementation challenges persist around coordinating diverse stakeholders whose interests don't always align and translating vision into operational reality. The Eurostack initiative presents a broader vision for Europe's digital sovereignty, encompassing the entire technology stack, from semiconductors and connectivity through cloud computing, AI, and digital platforms. Launched in 2024 and now supported by over 260 signatories, including businesses, SMEs, startups, and research institutions, Eurostack advocates for comprehensive European industrial policy addressing digital infrastructure across all layers. The Eurostack framework visualizes European digital sovereignty as three interconnected levels. The physical infrastructure layer includes semiconductors, connectivity infrastructure, data centers, and hardware systems. The logical infrastructure layer encompasses operating systems, cloud platforms, AI frameworks, and development tools. The application and services layer includes digital platforms, business applications, and citizen-facing services. This comprehensive approach recognizes that sovereignty requires control across all stack levels rather than focusing narrowly on individual technologies. Eurostack advocates argue that Europe's failure to establish competitive digital ecosystems has left it vulnerable to extraction by foreign tech giants who dominate key digital value chains. The initiative calls for moving beyond regulation toward active investment in sovereign digital infrastructures through targeted funding mechanisms, better access to data, strengthened public-private partnerships, and innovation-friendly policies that reduce regulatory burdens on European providers. The movement has gained remarkable policy momentum, described as the most successful policy movement in Brussels in the last 10 years, spreading from nowhere to everywhere in just 9 months. Eurostack advocates emphasize that digital sovereignty is fundamentally an industrial project aiming to emancipate Europe from digital dependency by building and scaling European digital assets and capabilities. The focus is single-mindedly on building rather than merely regulating or constraining foreign providers. European organizations are increasingly implementing sovereignty-focused technology strategies, though significant barriers remain. IDC's 2025 Worldwide Digital Sovereignty Survey reveals that protection against extraterritorial data requests has become the top sovereign cloud market driver in Europe, reflecting growing anxiety over foreign access to sensitive data. This shift demonstrates that sovereignty concerns now focus less on compliance and control, and more on autonomy from foreign government authority. European service providers have responded proactively with initiatives explicitly marketed as Made in Europe alternatives. Examples include Eurostack, Europe-led digital supply chain spanning chips, cloud, AI, and governance; Vertura, Europe's first sovereign edge cloud; and the EU-funded Sovereign European Cloud API, SECA, available to all European cloud providers. These initiatives represent Europe's Plan B, alternatives organizations can adopt as geopolitical risks and regulatory uncertainty deepen. However, adoption faces persistent challenges. WIRE's survey identified 4 consistent barriers preventing organizations from switching to European solutions: technical capabilities perceived as inferior to US alternatives, ecosystem effects where existing integrations favor incumbent providers, cost considerations as European alternatives often carry price premiums, and organizational inertia where switching costs appear to outweigh sovereignty benefits. Financial sector initiatives demonstrate sector-specific sovereignty assertions. The EU's Financial Data Access (FIA) framework, finalized in 2025, explicitly blocks major US tech companies, Meta, Apple, Google, and Amazon, from accessing European financial data sharing systems. Germany's position paper emphasized that excluding US platforms would promote the development of an EU digital financial ecosystem, guarantee a level playing field, and protect the digital sovereignty of consumers. This represents a rare defeat for big tech lobbying and signals increasing European willingness to accept economic costs to preserve sovereignty. The European digital sovereignty movement navigates fundamental tensions between competing objectives. Europe seeks simultaneously to establish regulatory leadership, build competitive European alternatives, maintain openness to global innovation, and preserve democratic values, goals that sometimes conflict in practice. Accenture's 2025 European AI Sovereignty Research highlights these tensions. The survey found that just 1/3, 36% of AI initiatives and data within European organizations require sovereign approaches due to regulatory requirements or data sensitivity, while 65% acknowledge they cannot remain competitive without non-European technology providers. This suggests European organizations seek balance between data control and access to global innovation, rather than absolute technological independence. Critics argue that Europe's sovereignty agenda risks becoming narrowly focused on championing European tech companies rather than addressing fundamental power concentration issues. Democratic digital sovereignty requires more than replacing US big tech with European big tech. It demands technology built on European democratic values, including open protocols, interoperability standards, participatory processes, and accountability mechanisms. This perspective calls for complementing Europe's industrial sovereignty strategy with democratic governance frameworks that strengthen institutional capacity to regulate effectively while empowering citizens, researchers, and civil society. The path forward requires sustained political will, substantial investment, and coordinated action across public and private sectors. European Parliament debates in October 2025 focused on implementing EU digital rules fully, stepping up investment in EU digital infrastructure, and maintaining highest standards despite external pressure. Commission President von der Leyen's State of the Union speech reaffirmed that Europe will always decide for itself. Regarding digital regulation and standards, announcing initiatives including the 28th Regime for Innovative Companies, Cloud and AI Development Acts, and EU Quantum Sandboxes. The European Digital Sovereignty Movement of 2025 represents a decisive turning point where rhetoric transforms into action, regulation combines with industrial policy, and dependency recognition drives capability building. While significant challenges remain, technical gaps, cost considerations, organizational inertia, and coordination complexity, the movement has established irreversible momentum toward a more autonomous European digital future that preserves democratic values while enabling competitive participation in global innovation ecosystems.